Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 261. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, I have news on Ukraine, China, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. So it'll probably be a pretty full show. A lot of things that I'm talking about on the show I have written and covered at the Libertarian Institute. And so if you would like to support the work I'm doing, not just this show, but also all the writing that I'm doing, also the great team that we have at the Institute, Connor Freeman, Patrick McFarlane, Will Porter, and of course, Scott Horton, Sheldon Richmond, and Keith Knight, go over and make a donation. You could get a free copy of one of Scott's books if you do donate as a kickback for that. So libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And again, this is a great way to support the work of, I think, a very important section of the libertarian movement and what we have going on at the Institute. Also, you can help out the show just by sharing it. Everything's hosted, show notes, everything at the Libertarian Institute, reprinted on the blog at antiwar.com. We have a YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee page for the video version. It should be up anywhere you could listen to audio podcasts, as well as on the Libertarian Institute all podcast feed, and that includes the Scott Horton Show, Liberty Weekly, Don't Tread on Anyone, and Year Zero. So lots of great content there. And last up, we have a Facebook and a Twitter account. The Twitter handle is @con_interest. The sponsor of the show is Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code PEACE. That will save you 20% when you spend $75 or more, and it gets the show a kickback. And so it's really a great deal because the CBD there is high quality. They have the lab tester results right there on their website. With the promo code, it's great price product, and you're helping out your favorite podcast when you do that. So again, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. All right, now let's get into the show. And the first article I have today on Ukraine is from Dave DeCamp, titled, Russia Says It Will Not Pause Military Operations in Ukraine During Peace Talks. Dave writes that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov announced Monday that Moscow does not plan to pause its military operations during any future rounds of peace talks with Kiev. Lavrov said that during talks in late February, Russian President Putin had ordered a pause in Russia's assault, but Moscow has since abandoned the policy. This is from Lavrov. After we became convinced that the Ukrainians were not planning to reciprocate, a decision was made that during the next round of talks, there would be no pause so long as the final agreement is not reached. Now, this is, discouraging news in that talks are very complicated, right? And I think it's, pretty unlikely that, they're going to talk for 2 weeks here and then just come to some kind of big negotiated agreement. There may have to be a ceasefire first. And the fact that people aren't dying is going to allow the temperature to dial down in both countries enough that they're able to accept a deal with compromise and work through issues and all that, where if there's fighting going on, the battlefield is changing and things like this, then both sides are constantly going to be trying to shift their leverage and what they're willing to compromise on and not. And so the status quo being enshrined in a ceasefire, I think provides far more fertile ground for diplomacy. But back to Dave's article here. Since Russia invaded on February 24th, the warring sides have held several rounds of in-person talks and meetings via video link. The latest in-person negotiations took place on March 29th in Turkey, where Ukraine offered a peace deal to Russia. Under the draft deal, Ukraine said it would give up its plans to join NATO, but Kiev wants security guarantees from the same military alliance's members, including the U.S. Last week, Lavrov said that the draft offer put forward by Ukraine was unacceptable. As the peace talks are stalled, Russia is focusing on its assault on Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. Ukraine's defense ministry warned on Monday that Russia has nearly completed its military buildup in the Donbass and is preparing a renewed assault in the Donetsk and Luhansk. Denis Pushlin, head of the breakaway Donetsk People's Republic, said Monday that the separatist forces will intensify their fight against Ukraine now the operation will be intensified. The more we delay, the more the civilian population simply suffers, being held hostage by the situation. We have identified areas where certain steps need to be taken and accelerated. Putin recognized Donetsk and Luhansk were published shortly before he attacked Ukraine and framed the invasion as a special military operation to protect the people in the Donbass. On March 25th, Russia's defense ministry announced the first stage of the invasion was over and said that it was switching to focus on liberating the Donbass. Since then, Russian forces have completely withdrawn from areas near Kiev and north of the capital city. So that is some of the status of diplomacy and also kind of where the fighting is going on right now in Ukraine. Another important article from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com yesterday. Zelensky says he's no longer interested in NATO's diplomacy. The president of Ukraine has not let up on his criticisms of NATO and told 60 Minutes in an interview that aired Sunday that he is no longer interested in the military alliance's diplomacy. Zelensky said, "When you're working in diplomacy, there are no results. All of this is very bureaucratic. That's why I am talking to them is absolutely justified. I don't have any more lives to give. I don't have any more emotions. I am no longer interested in their diplomacy that leads to the destruction of my country." And so it's unclear if Zelensky is maybe saying here that he is really starting to understand what NATO wants in Ukraine. And as we, have been saying and arguing on this show, myself and co-host Connor Freeman ways here are typically the guests I've had, like Sky Horton or Dave DeCamp. What we've been saying is what the NATO policy is, what NATO wants out of Ukraine isn't to really defend Ukraine, to protect Ukraine, to save the lives of the Ukrainian people, but rather to bleed Russia in Ukrainian territory, and they're willing to use the Ukrainians as cannon fodder to do this. And again, this seems to be the maybe most similar thing that Zelensky has said to acknowledging that that is the NATO policy. I was really concerned for the first year of the Biden administration that there may have been a real communication disconnect between Zelensky and Biden, where in public, the U.S. was saying things like, we're going to defend Ukraine's territorial integrity. And apparently, when most top officials called their Ukrainian counterparts from the White House to Kiev, that's more or less what the conversations were saying. However, there were token examples where that was essentially admitted not to be the case, where, in light of a Russian invasion, Biden made it clear that he wouldn't send troops to Ukraine. The head of the CIA Director William Burns said that it had been communicated by, I think, a higher level State Department official, maybe, that Ukraine would not join NATO for at least 10 years. And so there were those statements being made, too, that it's not that communication wasn't entirely happening, but even after the invasion, the U.S. says they're committed to Ukraine's territorial integrity and all this other rhetorical nonsense. And so, there is the fiction that they're putting out, and Zelensky has said that he was told by NATO that, look, we're not going to close the door on Ukrainian NATO membership, but Ukraine is never going to become a NATO member. So they're publicly keeping the door open for their own political stances at home, for their domestic political reasons, but they're willing to harm Ukraine to do it. And then the other reason is, of course, the geopolitical one, because this is an aggressive war launched by Russia. It's absolutely despicable what Vladimir Putin is doing. And just like the U.S. wars that have gone on, for the past several decades, they are damaging to. I mean, look, it's far better if you want to look at who was the biggest loser from the war in Iraq. It was the Iraqi people. Saddam Hussein was deposed and killed and all of that, but a million Iraqi people died. It didn't help Americans. 4,500 of our men and women died over there for absolutely no reason. It further destabilized the region. It created the rise and the fertile ground for the Al Qaeda in Iraq group that eventually morphed into the Islamic State after the U.S. pumped weapons into Syria and all this. But I guess the main point there was that it was bad for Americans, but was far, far worse for Iraqis. And so, this is a situation from the American perspective that this is going to be bad for Russia, right? Just like the Iraq War was bad for the U.S. However, the Iraq War was really bad for the Iraqis, and it's not like I guess the U.S. did spend the entire war saying that it was for the Iraqis and things like that, and so that is what they're doing here too. They're just, claiming that this is a war for the Ukrainians. It's just absolutely despicable. There's a great article on the fake diplomacy today at antiwar.com by the great Ted Galen Carpenter, and there's a lot of important people who have been writing on this issue, but for the last 8 months or so, I mean, there may be not a single more important foreign policy analyst to read than Ted. I think he has, I'm not trying to say anybody else is bad or anything like that, but if you want to go through from September till now and read Ted, your mind will be blown at how much this guy saw this coming and was talking about these kind of scenarios and just how right I think he's been about all this stuff. So again, great, other writers too, but definitely check out Ted's stuff because he has been fantastic. Back to the Decamp article here. Since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, Zelensky has been pleading with the U.S. and NATO to enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which would mean Western powers entering a direct conflict with Russia. For not going to war with Russia, Zelensky has slammed NATO for being weak and afraid of Moscow. Discussing negotiations with Russia, Zelensky said he would never recognize Crimea as Russian territory, even though the peninsula has been under Russian control since 2017. As a potential peace deal, Moscow wants Kiev to recognize the independence of the Donbass republics of the Donetsk and Luhansk. When asked if he was willing to give up any Ukrainian territory for peace, Zelensky said, overall, we are not ready to give away our country. I think we have already given up a lot of lives, so we will need to stand firm as long as we can on this, but this is life, different things happen. And so at least he is, starting to work some wiggle room into his rhetoric. I'm sure you guys will remember this story I covered 2 weeks ago or so for the Libertarian, or it might have eventually been for antiwar.com. I wrote this one up, where Zelensky gave an interview to Russian media and said he was willing to make territorial concessions. Later that day, he came out and made a statement that contradicted that, not directly saying, I no longer disagree with what I said previously, just say he wasn't willing to give up any of Ukraine. Dave wraps up here. When we understand one of their provisions is that they always like to talk about recognition of Crimea as Russian territory. I will definitely not recognize that, he added. The Ukrainian leader said that his country hasn't been willing to cede territory from the beginning. Had we been willing to give up our territory, there would have been no war, Zelensky said. And it's quite amazing that, that's maybe one of the things that we could look at here, that Russia was really looking for Ukraine to enshrine the de facto status quo on the ground in Ukraine into the new current borders. Russia controls the Crimean Peninsula. The Donbass republics are independent. The people there are Russian passport holders. They take Russian pensions. They aren't involved in the Ukrainian elections, and they have their own governments. So in all those ways, these are really independent territories, and Crimea really is a part of Russia. That is the current status quo on the ground today and has been for the past 8 years. And can't dispute that, can't argue it. It is what it is. And so a way around this war for Ukraine was just recognizing that and to what it was. Now I think Russia is going to take quite a bit more territory and call it, the Greater Donbass or something like that, and potentially, more territory around the Crimean Peninsula, particularly to secure some waterways that the Ukrainian government was trying to cut off to the Crimean Peninsula after it was taken over by Russia. But they, I don't think we'll really have the ability to do that anymore. So let's move on and talk about NATO some more. And this is maybe the most concerning escalation, I think, going on right now overall. U.S. officials say Finland, Sweden likely to join NATO in coming months. And this is from myself and Will Porter writing yesterday, April 11th at the Libertarian Institute. U.S. officials say Finland and Sweden are poised to apply for NATO membership in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO is prepared to grant the two Nordic states rapid entrance into the alliance, a move Russia views as geared towards confrontation. A U.S. official told the Times that membership for Sweden and Finland was a topic of conversation and multiple sessions during NATO meetings last week. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that the military bloc is prepared to fast-track Helsinki and Stockholm into the alliance. Sweden's ruling Social Democratic Party has traditionally opposed membership, but the party is now reversing its security platform in light of Moscow's military operations against Ukraine. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Sweden's security position changed fundamentally, a statement released on Monday said. Finland expected to apply for NATO membership in the coming weeks. Former Finnish Prime Minister Alexander Stubb said that a foregone conclusion that Helsinki would make its bid to join NATO by this summer. This matches the timeline that was given by a U.S. official. U.S. officials see Finland submitting its application in June, with Sweden expected to follow soon after. Secretary General Stoltenberg has said previously that Helsinki and Stockholm would be very much welcomed by all 30 allies, even suggesting that membership could be expedited. And one important note here is that for a country to join NATO, it does have to have the approval of all other member states. And so that would include, at this point, Montenegro or North Macedonia could object. But I do understand that all of the major military states, France, Germany, Turkey, and the U.S. and the UK are all in support of this. So my guess is they may be able to whip everybody in line, but who knows? And one potential issue that's been identified in the Finnish government would be what would happen if we make a bid for NATO membership, but then something were to happen between us and Russia before the membership bid was accepted. This is essentially the position that Ukraine was in, and nobody wants to be Ukraine right now. So anyway, back to the article. Over the weekend, NATO announced that it would engage in a massive military buildup along its border with Russia, with Stoltenberg saying that the alliance was making plans to deploy enough forces in all the states neighboring Russia to repel a potential invasion. Finnish membership would expand Russia and NATO's border by over 800 miles, a prospect vocally opposed by Moscow. Responding to the Times report on Monday, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov argued that the continued eastward growth of the alliance will not bring stability to the European continent, instead calling it a tool geared towards confrontation. All right. And I did cover the massive military buildup planned by NATO at antiwar.com on Sunday. And they are planning to put enough forces in all the border states, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Estonia, and I would assume going forward it'll probably include the Black Sea states like Hungary and Romania as well. And they want to put enough soldiers in all these countries not to be a tripwire. The current policy is we have a few thousand soldiers in all these states because Russia isn't going to kill Americans and provoke a larger war. So all we really need are a few Americans to act as what they call a tripwire, to like a big explosive. And so Russia will be unwilling to enter because of they would step on the tripwire. Now, the new plan is to put enough forces in all these countries to repel a Russian invasion. Now, what does this exactly mean? There could be some wiggle room here, and maybe it's not the worst case scenario. Maybe they're going to put like enough forces in Lithuania to repel an invasion of any Baltic state, and would plan like a rapid deployment thing to get enough troops into the other countries should that happen, which I think is an overstatement, and all these countries are unnecessarily worried about a Russian invasion. But we don't have to go down that path for this conversation. And so you could imagine, though, if this does require invasion prevention force in all these states, it's going to put a lot of troops on Russia's border. And Russia is not going to see that as just defensive, like with the Aegis Ashore missile defense systems that are in Poland and Romania. While they have, defensive purposes, obviously, if you have an army that's capable of defending Estonia, and you have the same army in Latvia and Lithuania, with maybe just a few changes in weapons and personnel, it could very quickly become a force capable of evading major Russian population centers that are just, a few hours drive from the border of these Baltic states. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, says U.S. wants independent Ukraine and weakened Russia. This from Dave DeCamp. On Sunday, National Security Advisor Sullivan said the U.S. would like to see an independent Ukraine and would like to see Russia weakened and isolated. Our policy is unequivocal that we will do whatever we can to help Ukraine succeed, Sullivan told Meet the Press. He said to achieve that goal, the U.S. will continue arming Ukraine and trying to hurt the Russian economy. We need to keep giving them support, military and strong economic sanctions to improve their position, their posture at the negotiating table, Sullivan said. But at the end of the day, what we really want to see is a free and independent Ukraine, a weakened and isolated Russia, and a stronger, more unified and determined West. While Russia and Ukraine have been engaged in negotiations, the Biden administration has shown little interest in diplomacy and appears to be prepared for a long-term conflict. Last week, Sullivan warned of a protracted war, and Russia is turning its forces on Ukraine's eastern Donbass region. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, made similar statements and said that the war could last for years. I do think that this is a very protracted conflict, he said. Since Russia invaded on February 24th, the U.S. has pledged $1.7 billion in new military aid to Ukraine. More is coming as NATO recently agreed to start sending heavier weapons to the war zone. In a statement during an interview on Sunday, Sullivan said the U.S. would give Ukraine the weapons it needs. And I did write up Sullivan's statements on the Sunday morning talk shows Meet the Press and This Week for antiwar.com on Sunday. The big takeaway I had was, Sullivan saying that it's going to give Ukraine the weapons it needs, but Zelensky actually saying in the 60 Minutes interview that he wasn't so sure and was just a little bit skeptical that the weapons were going to come through. I also mentioned the shipment of S-300s that apparently arrived in Ukraine and was destroyed shortly after. Let's move on to this story, this again from Dave DeCamp. Slovakia in talks with NATO alliances to send MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine. Slovak Prime Minister said Monday that Slovakia is in talks with its allies about an arrangement to send Soviet-designed MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine as NATO is working to send heavier equipment to be used in the war against Russia. Last week, Slovakia announced that it had sent its Soviet-designed S-300 missile defense system into Ukraine. In exchange, the U.S. is deploying a Patriot missile system to Slovakia. The Slovak government is looking for a similar deal with the U.S. when it comes to the MIDs. And so, while this didn't go through with Poland, the fact that the Patriot, the S-300 system did go from Slovakia to Ukraine means that this should be a little bit of a concern. There's a lot of problems with this. The first being practically, is it even going to be at all useful? It seems that the S-300s that got to Ukraine were almost instantly destroyed. Who knows that they're bringing in more later or anything like that, but it would suggest that, Russia does have the capability to target and destroy larger war equipment as soon as it enters Ukrainian space. Further, if these airplanes are taking off from, say, an airstrip in Slovakia and go into Ukraine and attack Russian forces, well, uh, you know, if U.S. forces, if Russian forces, took off from some kind of base and attacked U.S. forces anywhere in the Middle East, I think we would see that country as taking a role in an effort to kill Americans and, potentially being at war with that country. So are we putting Russians Slovak war on the table with this? And of course, Slovakia being a NATO member state means that, that's just World War III right there that we're talking about with this dangerous move. And then, of course, one of the big things here is it may just be an arms boondoggle, that this is all about selling more F-16s, and one of the ways to sell F-16s is to get the old mids destroyed, and so that could also be a part of the whole plan here. I guess the last thing I will note about this is it is, the US deploying more of its warplanes and weapons into Eastern Europe, which ultimately I think add to the destabilization in the region. All right. So this, I think this is the last Dave DeCamp I have on Russia. During U.S. Army Chief's visit to Lithuania, Lithuania announced a plan to train Ukrainian troops. And so there was a report from Lloyd Austin earlier in the week where he said that the U.S. was training Ukrainian forces in the U.S. on the Switchblade drones, but now we have Lithuania saying that they're going to train Ukrainian forces to on new American weapons. Again, these are going to be used to kill Russian forces, and so even if those are invading forces, the fact that Lithuania is carrying out this training may be, putting Lithuania in a little bit of the Russian crosshairs. Now, one more story here on Ukraine. This is from myself and Will Porter writing yesterday at the Libertarian Institute, titled Ukraine Seeking Tens of Billions in Financial Aid as War Costs Mount. Ukraine is seeking tens of billions in financial aid from the International Monetary Fund's COVID relief program. Kiev says it's in a massive military crunch due to the Russian invasion. The World Bank estimates Ukraine's GDP will decrease by 45% in 2022. Ukrainian finance minister told the Financial Times, "We are under great stress in the very worst financial condition. Now it is a question of the survival of our country. If you want us to help us continue fighting this war, to win this war, then help us." He laid out a plan where Ukraine would get access to billions in IMF funds allocated to COVID relief, but never used. And then I think they called them rich countries they're asking for the money from, which, you could call the U.S. rich, but we are in a lot of debt too. Ukraine estimates that 270 billion in damage has occurred since Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a special military operation on February 24th. The World Bank says the war will lead to 45% contraction of the Ukrainian economic output in 2022. The country's finance ministry reports about 30% businesses have ceased activities and 45% were asked reduced capacity. The World Bank believes the wider region will also take an economic hit from the war and sanctions. Russia is estimated to see 11% GDP reduction. Belarus and Moldova are expected to take the bigger hits. However, all of Central Europe will be impacted with about a 4% GDP contraction. All right. That is the news I have on Ukraine. Now I want to move on and update what I talked about on the last show, and that is Imran Khan, the Pakistani prime minister was up for a vote of no confidence, and that vote was successful. So I write this yesterday at the Libertarian Institute. Pakistan chooses new PM after Imran Khan claims U.S.-backed regime change. Imran Khan was removed as Pakistan's prime minister after a successful no confidence vote. He was ousted just days after accusing the U.S. of attempting regime change. Shehbaz Sharif was selected by Parliament to be the next prime minister. Khan has been prime minister since 2018. A broad reaching coalition voted him out on Sunday. Sharif is the younger brother of Nawaz Sharif, who served as prime minister on 3 occasions. During Khan's rule, Sharif was charged with money laundering and arrested, although I couldn't find anywhere where he was actually convicted. It seems that they seized a lot of his family's assets, also target Sharif's son, and so I'm not sure how much this plays, if at all, into the desire from Ukraine to see this government overthrown or something like, or, excuse me, not Ukraine. If that's why Sharif is going after Khan and tried and successfully removed him from power, or if it has other issues, if the U.S. is really involved. Khan claims the U.S. singled him out for refusing to be a puppet of the West. He refused an invitation from President Joe Biden to attend the Summit of Democracy. Recently, Pakistan has refused to back Western efforts to condemn Russia at the UN. Khan attempted to hold on to power by dissolving the country's legislature in a last-ditch effort that did not work, and that the Supreme Court invalidated. In response, he said the U.S. was attempting regime change. While Khan lost the legislator's support, he still maintains some popularity. Protesters took to the street across the country. He seems to have particular popularity among younger protesters and young males. And then in Islamabad, roadblocks were set up near the parliamentary building. Pakistan's next elections are scheduled for the summer of 2023. There's a lot of people that are amplifying Khan's claims, and I certainly want to draw attention to them to some extent. I want to make sure that people understand. I'm very skeptical here. He didn't present any evidence. He was a politician that was attempting to cling to power. There are, economic issues all over the world, discontent with how governments handled the coronavirus and things like that. Violence has spiked in Pakistan recently. There's instability in the neighboring Afghanistan, so maybe they're not happy with the way he handled that situation and the Americans there. But also the Trinki Taliban have launched some operations against the Pakistani military recently, and there's been some battles between those two groups, as well as one of the separatist groups in Pakistan. All this could also be contributing to it. So a lot going on in Pakistan. Don't want to chalk it all up to the Americans, but Khan is standing against the Biden world narrative, and we have seen in the past that is enough to get you removed from your seat of power by the Americans. And it could also be that the U.S. just removed some support that they had for Khan, and that, the dominoes fell and he was then removed from power without that additional little bit of American help or something like that. Australia, US, and UK plan to develop hypersonic missiles. The US, Britain, and Australia announced on Tuesday they will work together to develop hypersonic missiles under the recently created AUKUS, a UK-US military alliance. President Biden, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced the plan in a joint statement. The leader said they are committed to commerce, new trilateral cooperation on hypersonic and counter-hypersonic and electronic warfare capabilities, as well as to expand information sharing and to deepen cooperation on defense innovation. And so, this is important, as the AUKUS treaty is seen as very provocative by China. It contributes to this new Cold War ideology that's being pushed by the Biden administration, this idea of democracy versus autocracy and all this other kind of garbage. But it does seem that they're continuing to try to move forward on this. Let's see. Now we have this from Dave DeCamp back on April 6th. The U.S. warns China would face sanctions similar to Russia for invading Taiwan. Now, I thought this article was interesting because, in a way, it's an unnecessary threat to make towards China. The two situations, while sharing some similarities, I think are very different, particularly strategically, where you do have Taiwan, being an island that is scores of miles away from China, and that requiring likely a much more difficult beach landing than what Russia was able to do by simply rolling across the border that they share on three sides with Ukraine. Well, at least with the military alliance that Russia shares with Belarus, being that is the case. And so these are far different situations. I think the Ukrainian or the Taiwanese government is far less corrupt and more stable than the Ukrainian government, and so that's also a factor in all of this. Also, the relationship between China and I think how it views and would like to reunify what it sees as one country is far different than the security situation that Putin viewed was an existential threat because of NATO coming through Ukraine. Now, if the U.S. starts putting like Aegis Ashore missile defense systems in Taiwan, that could change the balance enough, or something. One of these things could change the way that China views Taiwan enough that they, would see it as an existential security issue, but at this point they see it as a reunification issue. And I think if you understand that, you'll understand that, the way that they would look at going about that is quite different. And so I don't think it really made sense to make the threat, but at the same time, if that's what the U.S. is going to do, then, China may just say that, well, that really ain't that much of a consequence, because with the U.S. pushing more countries to have to take a side, either Russia or the U.S., a lot of countries are falling on the side of Russia, and China is in that category. And so if you're just going to isolate all the countries that are opposed to what Russia has done in Ukraine, then you're lowering the potential threat that those and punishment that those sanctions would be that you level against China. All right, and then this one from myself, and I believe, Will Porter at the Libertarian Institute. State Department greenlights Patriot missile support package for Taiwan. This from April 6th. Washington has approved an arms sale to Taiwan worth $95 million, agreeing to provide the island with training and gear for its U.S.-made Patriot missile systems. China has previously sanctioned U.S. American firms over similar transfers. The State Department authorized the deal on Tuesday. The Pentagon noting it would include tactical assistance and related equipment for Taipei's Patriot batteries. The Defense Department statement says the proposed sale will help involve the security and recipient and assistance in managing political stability, military bases, economic and progress in the region. Spokesperson for Taiwan's president said the island is singularly grateful for the announcement, observing that it is the third arms sale provided under the Joe Biden administration, touting the rock-solid cooperative partnership between Taiwan and the U.S. Taipei has fielded the interceptor since 1997, buying at least 400 Patriot missiles in that time, and embarked on a project to modernize the system in 2019. I think they currently have the PAC-1 systems, and they're trying to upgrade to the PAC-3. Beijing views the advanced weapon sales as a threat to sovereignty, as it considers Taiwan a part of its own territory. And it's worth noting that the Patriots are made by Raytheon, and of course that is the former employer of the current Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. All right, wrapping up today with a quick story from Afghanistan. Afghan children killed in separate blasts. This from April 2nd by myself and Will Porter, writing at the Libertarian Institute. A number of Afghan children and young men were killed and dozens more wounded after explosions rocked Afghan's Helmand and Herat province just hours apart. Though one incident appears to be accidental, it remains unclear if the other one was a result of deliberate attack, and I couldn't find any updates on this even though it happened 10 days ago. Two blasts erupted at sports fields in western Herat region on Friday, killing at least 5 people and injuring 25 others, among them youths, according to Taliban officials. Now, Herat has been the site of several Islamic State Khorasan faction attacks, and particularly the Taliban has often refrained from attacking sports and community complexes. Not that they haven't, but ISIS-K has made these popular targets. So for those two reasons, I kind of suspect it's ISIS-K. Herat has been the frequent target of ISIS-K attacks since the Taliban took power in August, while the government said the field was recently cleared of landmines and other undetonated munitions, and noted that 2 other devices were found after the deadly explosions. Some reports state that the incidents may have been accidents, but other officials suggest that the explosives were planted at the field recently and were not merely missed in the mine clearing accident. No group has taken responsibility for the attack in Herat, however. Another blast in the Helmand province on Friday reportedly killed a group of children aged between 3 and 12. The Taliban stating that happened upon an unexploded mortar and began playing with it. 2 other kids were injured and are being treated. Unexploded ordnances can plague countries after extended warfare, with leftover shells, mines, and bombs frequently killing civilians years and even decades after hostilities. In Vietnam, for example, more than 100,000 people have been killed or injured by such explosions since the U.S. withdrawal in 1975. Laos, said to be the most heavily bombed nation in history per capita after Washington dropped 2.5 million tons of munitions between 1964 and 1973, also faces similar problems to this day. Afghanistan has been no exception after decades of fighting, with children often injured by unexploded bombs while collecting scrap metal to earn money. According to the country's Director of Mine Action Coordination, DMAC, an average of 139 civilians lose their lives or limbs every month due to unexploded mines and munitions, citing the vicious and continuous cycle of conflict over the last 4 decades. So, for the Afghans, the war will continue to go on, and not just the economic war that's starving tens of thousands to death, but also just the leftover ordinances from all this warfare all these years. All right, that's where I'm wrapping up the show today. Thanks, everyone. Just a reminder, it is the fundraising time at the Libertarian Institute. Right now, there are matching funds, and so if you want to go donate $100, it instantly becomes $200, and that's an absolute huge help to what we're doing, at conflicts of interest and all the writing I'm doing in everybody's projects at the Institute. So many great books to come, so many great articles being written, so much fantastic original content for the Institute, and we really appreciate your support with that.